let's just go, before we get into the substance, Miguel, let's go over some of the details. Can you just spell your name for the record?
Okay, Miguel, M-I-G-U-E-L, middle initials J, last name Hernandez, or Hernandez, Hernandez.
Wonderful. And can you really quickly describe when you worked with CRS and in what positions?
Yes, I worked with CRS starting in about mid-1971. And then I left the agency, I think it was 1976 or 78. I'll have to check my notes. And then I came back in 1980 and stayed there until 1990. No, I came back in 1986, 1986. And then I stayed there until 1998 when I was reduced in force, laid off, as they say in plain English. And I was fortunate enough, because I had a lot of federal seniority, to land a job with DEA, which is the direct opposite of CRS. And I stayed there till September 14th, 1998, when I retired.
Very good. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory before you went to CRS the first time, and what brought you back to CRS the second time?
All right. I was first employed by the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity, otherwise known as OEO, the Anti-Poverty Agency. And I was in the New York regional office. Basically, I was a grants officer / field representative assigned to work with various community action program agencies, CAPs, as they were called, initially reviewing and approving their grants for a whole series of anti-poverty programs, ranging from Head Start to housing to on-the-job training, anti-hunger programs, feeding programs, legal services, and on-the-job training programs. So it was a variety of programs that came before me, and I got the applications each year and went over them, make sure the right boxes were checked and analyzed and the math was right and all that kind of stuff. And then I sent it on up the line to be reviewed by people who are of higher grade and supposedly higher intelligence than me. President Johnson, like TRS, basically started this program off the ground, and he felt it would be a more effective program than had been in place before, because they required that each program have maximum feasible participation by the poor people, meaning that they would be on the boards, they would be in the decision-making process, some of them would be employed on these agencies and so forth. But these agencies were riddled with a lot of problems, and a lot of them stemmed from complaints that they were not effective, that they wasted the money and so forth. And so I had to go out there, and many of these complaints came from conservative elements in the community and local politicians as well. But in addition to improving these programs, the bulk of my time was actually spent in settling differences between these conservative elements and the opponents elements and the community action agencies of their boards, their executive directors, and so on. But I never saw it as mediation. In fact, I didn't even know what mediation meant, So I really saw myself as I fancied myself, I should say, as some kind of a diplomat, that would go back and forth, on a domestic level, you know what I mean? So I've shuttled back and forth in these warring parties and try to kind of calm the waters, so to speak, and so that took up a lot of my time. But in addition to reviewing the grants and all that stuff, so I was constantly not in the office. I was out there in the field, so to speak, most of the time, and a lot of them involved like late night meetings and meetings in all sorts of weird places and and so forth. So it wasn't an ordinary job. Anyway,
I'll just
yeah.
note that I appreciate that how you were resolving conflict with a political hue to it from the outset in this position.
Yeah.
And I'm certain we'll get to more of that later.
Okay. Yes. Anyway, I basically got involved with CRS during the Newark riots of 1967. New Jersey blew up in 1967. We had riots in Newark, Plainfield, New Jersey, where I spent a lot of my time, and Paterson, New Jersey. And there I met Victor Risso of CRS, regional office in New York, and a guy named Joe Ford, who ran the satellite office of CRS in Newark, New Jersey. And we were constantly during those tense moments in those communities, I would run into them. And we became familiar, we became friends, and we then decided to kind of, merge our efforts, or, what do you call it? Add to each other's efforts. And so we worked on things like setting up with the CAPS, having them, the employees of the CAPS, go out into the communities and go door to door into the neighborhoods where the problems were happening, and asking people to not be on the streets and, stay off the streets, particularly in the evenings when a lot of stuff was happening. And, some people did and some people didn't, but that's what we did. So in other words, we made the CAP kind of peacemakers, calming the situation down, that kind of stuff. And that worked. And we also got them involved in what I call rumor verification centers. And I don't call them rumor control because I felt you can't control rumors, you really can't. And so what we would do when, reports come in and said, this is happening in this park and this and that, blah, blah, blah. We would send somebody out there, okay? And they would call back and they say, no, 600 people are not marching on the police headquarters or whatever, whatever it was. Oh, yes, they are. And, blah, blah, blah. So then the word got out into the community as to basically what was happening. So people in the community more or less knew what was happening, not just what was on, on the news and what things they heard and so forth and so on. They could call in and verify that whether it was true or not. So that worked fairly well. And there was a guy in Washington, D.C. office in the headquarters. His name was Art. Oh, gosh, I can't remember his name at the last minute. But anyway, Art was a media guy and had come to CRS from the media. And he helped us in designing these rumor verification centers and giving us advice what to do, what not to do, and so forth and so on. So it was a good collaboration between myself as OEO, and also there were other people on my OEO team as well. It wasn't just me. So OEO had a presence in the community in addition to two guys from CRS. So anyway, so we worked together, and everything worked out fairly well. But the CAPS, no matter what, the CAPS were accused, particularly Newark, of quote unquote, fomenting the riots. And one day I got a visit I was told to come back to headquarters in Manhattan. Oh, and there were two investigators there. I think they were from the FBI, but they were from some senator's office, and they were doing a report that was going to go to Congress, and they were asking me what was going on. So I told them what was happening, and then I invited them. I said, "Why don't you come out and see for yourself? What's going on? But don't take my word for it. See what's happening." So anyway, they did that, and so far I never heard more about this. But on some level, years later, it made its way into the Kerner report. As to what was going on and so forth. I mean, I wasn't mentioned and so forth, but the general idea that the Caps were not, the instigators of these situations. So anyway, 1970, I left OEO, and I went to become deputy executive director of the East Harlem Tenants Council. Because the money was not that good. I was really a low-level OEO employee. I was like a, GS 7 or 9 or something like that. And they offered me a nice salary and everything. I went there. But no surprise, I did find the job kind of boring. It was basically an administrative job, keeping people's time cards and stuff like that, So Victor and Wally Warfield rescued me from that, and they offered me, they wanted me to come work with CRS because they knew my work and they felt it was similar to what they were doing, and that I would be a good fit for it. So I went back. I joined the CRS sometime in 1970. I forget exactly when, 70, and then it took a whole other year almost for the clearances. You had to go before the FBI and submit tons of paper, so you would get top secret clearance. Why you had to do that, I really don't know to this day. But they went around and they talked to my neighbors, and some of them said, "Oh yeah, we know Hernandez. He's a drunk. He beats his wife." I mean, they were kidding, but But that had to be clarified. Anyway, so it took about a year. And then I think sometime in 71, I think it was, I finally got in the door. But at that time, Ben Holman, who was the national director of CRS, he had been a media guy in Chicago, and he learned his trade there, I guess. And I forget which paper it was. But anyway, he had a different idea about what CRS should be, and rightly so. He thought that instead of going out and responding to these riots and demonstrations and whatever was going on, it would be better to be have a programmatic effort for CRS. Meaning that what he did, because he felt there was that differences in the way people, minority people particularly, but white people as well, poor people as a whole, were not getting access to all of the programs and the benefits of various programs, and in HUD and all of the other agencies, federal agencies that had federal programs of various kinds of benefits. So he hired people from various fields who were subject matter experts, not generalists like myself, but subject matter experts in housing, education, economic development, media. He was big on media, and administration of justice. So some were police officers, some were correctional officers, some were lawyers. Some people had worked in the criminal justice system at one time. And he felt that they could be kind of, they would bring the expertise that was needed so that these communities could get into the programs and get the services. And everybody carried around the Bible, which was the a huge book of federal assistance programs. You know, had like a catalog of them. You know, and said who was eligible, what they did, blah blah blah, and so forth. And then he also required each federal office, each CRS office, to be part of the Federal Regional Council, which was all the agencies met together once a month or whatever it was. And, you know, they went around the table, discussed what was going on in the community. And so that if CRS needed their resources and funds and all that stuff, that this could be brought up at a meeting with all these people in attendance. And, you know, then the agencies, you know, they didn't have to do it, but they could, you know, then they got word, you know, and so forth. So it was a nice effort, you know, but I was relegated to be one of the firefighters. You know, they still needed people to go out, you know, when things were happening. And so that's basically
so
what I did.
You were a conciliator, is that right?
Yes, a conciliator, but I hated that title. I never used it. I see it as a concession. I know.
What'd you call yourself?
It wasn't macho enough for me, okay?
That's funny.
I like to be out and mix it up and, you know, with the people, so to speak, and be out there. So that's basically what I did. And then I responded to all the hot spots, and I was let me see if I can remember here. I made myself some notes here. But that's basically what I did.
And so, just so I have a clear understanding of the timeline, I'll dig in a little bit more.
Yeah.
You were at CRS for a number of years.
Yeah.
When did you leave?
I left in, I think it was 1978. Yeah, 78. Okay. Yeah.
So you're there for about.
I have to double check, but I believe that was the time that I left.
And you said you came back in about 86. Is that right?
Yeah, I came back in 86. But when I left, you know, I said, well, no, what happened was, why I left, I think it's important. I had been around that time, there was a huge dispute in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn between the Hasidim, the Hasidic sect, which is ultra-conservative. They belong to something called a Satmar sect because they came originally from St. Mary's in Russia, which sounds Catholic, but you know. But anyway, they came from Satmar and they fled, you know, sometime after World War II, and they settled in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, an area that I knew a lot about because that's where I grew up. And at some point, the New York City Housing Authority was planning to build another housing development in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. I forget the name of it now, but anyway, the Satmar wanted apartments there for several reasons. One was that many of these apartments had terraces, and the terraces could be used to build sukkah huts. A sukkah is a temporary structure built for the festival of Sukkot, okay, which represented the wilderness huts that the Israelites built after they left Egypt. And I forget how many days the festival is anyway. So these terraces were available and they could put them out there. Before they put them on the fire escapes in the tenement houses in Brooklyn, but the terraces are a little bit bigger and better, you know? So they wanted those. And the Puerto Ricans wanted it too, you know? Hey, we want a terrace, you know? Um, a lot of these apartments also had larger kitchens because they were for larger families. The Hasidim have larger families, and so do the Puerto Ricans. So they clashed over that as to who would get the larger apartments. The kitchens were particularly important for the Hasidim because of their religious practices, which required dietary issues, where they would prepare food and so forth. Couldn't mix, dairy and meat and that kind of stuff like that. And the Puerto Ricans, they wanted larger kitchens too, So, and then the other one was the elevators. The Hasidim wanted the elevators to stop on each floor on the Sabbath, okay? Because pushing the elevator buttons to stop at your floor was considered to be work, and they could not work on the Sabbath. So there was a lot of things. So that was the subject of the dispute. So I got assigned to it. I went out there to see what was going on, and I wasn't getting anywhere. But anyway, I called in our housing guy. Okay, hey, come on down, and this is a housing issue, right? Okay. But he couldn't get the first base either with anybody. Nobody was, people go, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't working. So then I said, you know what? I used to live in this neighborhood. I used to know a lot of people in this neighborhood. So when I was a kid, a youngster, like 8, 9, 10, 12, like that, I was what they call a Shabbos Goy. A Shabbos Goy is a person who is non-Jewish, but does things like turning the lights on in the synagogue on the Sabbath, turning on the heat, doing certain things that the religious Jews, not the secular Jews, but the religious Jews weren't allowed to do under their. And my parents said it's okay, it's a good thing, do it and everything. And they told me, don't accept any money from them, okay? Don't accept any money. Okay, this is just something you have to do or something like that. I don't know exactly how to put it, but they told me don't take any money. I was kind of disappointed, frankly. I could use the money, but I made friends. You know what I mean? It's in the normal thing that they would call me and then with a problem and sometimes they would you couldn't use your key if you're Jewish to open your apartment, so I would open their apartment for them. They gave me keys. They trusted me. They gave me keys. If they, whatever, and stuff like that. So I made friends. Bottom line, that was it. So I went back to the synagogue, which was not the Satmar synagogue, was another one, but more traditional kind of a synagogue, and if I can call it that. But anyway, so they said, look, I'm having this problem and I can't get to first base and blah, blah, blah. And could you help me? So it paid, in other words, I got paid back, And they went over and they talked to this kid, I was a kid then, talked to this guy and he's a good person and we know him and blah, blah, blah. So I got instant entree into our Hasidic community. And then I remembered, okay, who do I know in the Hispanic community? Well, the Puerto Rican community, basically at that time, it was Puerto Ricans, now it's different Hispanic groups in Williamsburg. But, I talked to, I belonged to a group, a quote unquote, when I was a teenager, a quote unquote gang, but, it wasn't really a gang, it wasn't a criminal gang or a violent gang. I mean, we never fought anybody, but we called ourselves the Ellery Street Bop. Ellery Street is a neighborhood, a street in Williamsburg, and we call ourselves the Ellery Street Bops, B-O-P-S. And we had a clubhouse, which was a vacant storefront. And it was used basically to, we had parties there, teenage parties. I won't tell you everything that went on there, but we had parties. And so I talked to some of those guys and I went back there and believe it or not, the clubhouse was still there. And I talked to the guys and they said, oh yeah, we remember you. Mike, they call me Mike. Everybody called me Mike then, you know. Oh, we remember you. And all that stuff. So I said, well, look, I'm having this problem. So they said, okay, we'll talk to somebody where we know in up in Williamsburg, closer to where the action was, you know. So they helped me get access to that community. So I started, you know, shuttling back and forth because that's all I really knew, how to talk to this one. I never knew the concept of bringing people around a table, or I never really used that at my, you know, in that time. And so, you know, conversation started going, and that the word got out to the wider New York City community about what was going on in Williamsburg and the, you know, and the conversation. So I got a call from the mayor's office. At that time it was Mayor Beam, you know. So this guy says, listen, Hernandez, we know you're working out there, and you know, the mayor is very concerned about the situation, blah, blah, blah. And we want to know what you're doing. And so they invited me to a meeting at Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's house, you know. And it was a Sunday morning. And I go up there, and the meeting is held in the kitchen. So the mayor is there. AB was a little short guy, you know, about 5 foot nothing. And so we're talking the meeting, but he has other people there. He has the police commissioner. I think he had Herman Badillo, who was, I think at that time he was either Bronx Borough president or a congressman. You know, I think he was the first Puerto Rican congressman. So Herman Badillo was there, the police commissioner was there, and a guy who was the head of the American Jewish Committee. His name was Haskell Lazaire. And so we're talking about, you know, this whole situation and, you know, what should be done, blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, they came up with a plan as to how they were going to reassign apartments. I mean, it wasn't my plan, but they were, you know, I made some suggestions, but, you know, they basically cooked it up. And so I thought, fine, this is great, this is terrific. And they went back and they sold it to the community, you know, because New York City housing, all right, the guy who was the head of the housing authority at that time, he was at that meeting too. So he had all the players, in other words, present, you know, New York City people present, and somebody from the Hispanic community, and one of the leaders of the Hispanic community, Herman Badillo, and so forth. But there weren't the people from the neighborhood itself, okay? You know, this was like a top-down decision, all right? So anyway, it was done. But when I got back to next day, I got back, it was Monday or Tuesday, sometime during the week, I was back at the office, and a guy from the U.S. Attorney's Office shows up. His name was Dennison Young. And Dennison Young was the principal assistant to Rudolph Giuliani, who at that time was the U.S. attorney, okay? And he was like very famous. He arrested and investigated a lot of mafia people, you know, and he made quite a name for himself. He goes ahead. And this guy, Young, said to me, he says, Mr. Giuliani wants you to stop working in Williamsburg with this case, because we're investigating a civil rights complaint by somebody in the neighborhood. I said, well, who's that? He said, I can't tell you. All right. And we're investigating this civil rights complaint, and we're going to prosecute it. Okay. We don't want you, CRS, or Mike, you know, we don't want you, Mike, in this thing. You got to drop out of this thing. So I called the mayor up. I said, I didn't know, you know, and they were going to report me to the, you know, to the U.S. attorney. I know they were going to go all the way up to maybe to the president. I don't know, but it was like a threat, you know what I mean? And the U.S. attorney, you know, is the highest federal official in the city of New York, you know. So anyway, so I called the mayor, and the mayor said to me something to the, I don't remember his exact word, but he said to me, "Over my dead body," you know. So I never heard anything more about it, and you know, and the problem was solved. At least that particular problem, you know, that time. So that was, you know, that was what basically. That was I think one of the more memorable cases because of the characters and the, you know, the whole thing was really, and in some instances it was very funny and serious and, you know, whatever. So basically they worked out a settlement for the for how the apartments were going to be. It was basically what it was. It was a lottery, you know. And everybody could say, all right, why? I don't know why I didn't think of that, but you know,
right.
I was there when it happened.
There you go. And if you hadn't used your connections to get things started, maybe
that's right.
It would have escalated.
That's right.
That effort to gain entry, to get into that conversation by leveraging your contacts is just really dynamic.
Yeah.
Now you said you, at least at that time, you were shuttling. You were using shuttle diplomacy, being a diplomat. You didn't have conversations around the table.
No.
Later on in your career, did you have table-oriented conversations?
Yes.
What brought about that change?
Well, we, at some point, CRS decided to get serious about that aspect of the agency. And so what they did, they sent us all to training in mediation, and we had people from the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, whatever it's called, I forget. And there was, that's the name, right? And they had some guys who ran a mediation program in Manhattan. The guy's name was Arthur Barnes, and I forget the other guy's name, but one person was the Manhattan Borough president. I forget his name, but anyway, they were central figures in New York, not-for-profit world, you know, whatever. They were very well known. So, and they had a labor mediator who earned his stripes settling transit disputes in New York City. Oh, geez, I can't forget it. I forget his name at the moment. I'm having a lot of temporary Alzheimer's, you know, but I just can't come up with it. But anyway, he was really big. And so we went up to their offices and we had, I don't know, a couple of weeks of training and role plays and all that stuff. And so that's how we got trained in mediation. So I had a couple of mediation cases, and after a while, after I came back, I think it was, one of them was involving a huge oil company, Texaco at that time, and there were a number of Black employees who filed discrimination complaints, and it was a big, you know, it was in the newspapers and all of that stuff. And it was in federal court. And it so happened that somebody I knew, in fact, a guy who lived in my adopted hometown of Ossining, New York, was a federal judge who was his name was Charles Bryant, and he was a chief judge of the Southern District. He was a conservative Republican. I think he was appointed by Nixon or Bush, I'm not sure. But anyway, I used to come to work together because it was across the street from where CRS was, the federal building there, and the federal court. And anyway, so he called me and said, I remember you told me you work with CRS and blah, blah, blah. And I have this case. I want to get it off my chest. I want to get it off my table, my desk. You know what I mean? This is a mess. So he said, why don't you talk to them and see if you can do something? And okay, Charlie, I'll do whatever you say, So
this is mediation. This is a formal
mediation.
court annexed mediation.
Yes, right.
Court connected mediation.
Right.
Outside your typical scope of work, right?
Yeah, right. But I had some training in it. I mean, I never really, be very frank with you, I never, particularly community mediation, I never felt it was really, first of all, it was almost impossible to do. Because in most mediation, labor mediation, you have two definable sides, You have labor on one side and you have management on the other. And, sometimes you have disputes with teacher groups and whatever. And, you can say who can speak for who. But in this community mediations, they're wild because a lot of people, jump in and they're screaming for their side, and they're not accepting what leaders say. They say, "Oh, you sold us out," and this and that, So there were a whole different place. There was business people involved, if it was a chamber of commerce, like a lot of times, there was street riots and stuff like that, stores being burned, stuff. So they, it was difficult. So, but anyway, I said, okay, I'm gonna jump into this because Charlie Bryant's my friend. I got to do right by him,
He's the chief judge of the Southern
District. Chief judge, you know what I mean? So I met with the Texaco people. They had the best lawyers, they could hire. They hired some what we call a white shoe law firm, That's what we call them in New York. They in the summertime they put on white shoes and those boater hats, those kind of guys. So they had and the black employees had very good lawyers too, civil rights lawyers, who knew what they were doing there. So after a lot of back and forth, they finally agreed, and basically they agreed because Brian called him up and said, "Look, you're gonna mediate this thing." He told them, and you're gonna meet with Mr. Hernandez and blah blah blah. So they got scared. They didn't want to upset the judge, right? So I had leverage, so to speak. Okay. So anyway, we'd go up there to, we decided we're going to meet at Texaco, and they had the best offices and the best conference rooms. And whenever we went to these conference rooms, there would be all kinds of refreshments and sandwiches and all kinds of things, just a right atmosphere. So we decided to meet there, and we start off and I explained to them what mediation is, and I told them I'm a neutral third party and I don't take sides, and I'm not a judge. I don't make the decisions. You make the decisions, and this is going to be cheaper than the court case, and why it costs less. It wouldn't, I told them I don't get paid, so anyway, I gave them that whole speech. Anyway, I don't know if they ever accepted that or not, but we had, I don't know, a whole bunch of meetings, and it went back and forth. And then one day, as a clear blue sky, I get a call rather, from a guy who's a lowly clerk, in the mailroom or something like that. I don't remember his name to this day, but anyway, he worked there.
At Texaco.
At Texaco. And he was white himself. He wasn't a minority person. And he told me he had information to the effect that, because he had heard conversations and he had documentation and all stuff, that these Texaco employees, higher level people, had in fact discriminated in one way or another against the black folk, And I said, well, that's very interesting, but I don't know that. I'm here to try to settle the case. I'm not prosecuting. I'm not deciding who's guilty and who's innocent. Okay, that's not what I have to do. So I said, but if you have something you know, that borders on that, the right party to handle that is the Justice Department, you know. And so, and you gotta, you know, but anyway, this guy didn't do that either. He went to the media and bam, the whole case blew up in my face, you know, the whole mediation, because now he went to the lawyers, he went to the media for they sent him to the Texaco, they sent him rather to the civil rights lawyers, you know. And the guy called me from the civil rights group and said, forget it, Miguel, this case is over, you know. And that's what happened, you know. So Texaco ultimately, they went back to court. I told the judge what happened. Obviously, I had to report them to, you know, I didn't report them every single detail of it. He didn't want to know that. But I told him, I said, this is not going any further. And he said, well, why not? I said, well, this guy is revealing everything, you know, what happened and so forth. So it's out of my, it's beyond mediation. So anyway, that's what happened to my famous top level media making mediation.
You can only control what you can control.
That's right. You can't control these things.
Okay. That's right. Well, that is fascinating. And it's amazing to me that you did that in your capacity as a CRS conciliator, but outside the scope of your normal work.
Yeah.
There was flexibility in the office to do that.
Oh, one more thing, if I may, on that thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, 6 months later, a year later, I forget when it was, I get a call from this guy who was a writer, and he is writing a book he's ghostwriting a book on behalf of the complainants, okay? Telling the whole story of what thing, you know. And I thought it was a bad idea because, anyway, so he wanted to know chapter and verse what happened. He wanted to get my version of what happened. And I was under this, not secrecy, what do you call it? Confidentiality clause, you know, where people CRS are not to reveal publicly what they're doing and everything. I don't know for how long that's supposed to last. I mean, statute of limitations is gone now. You know, I've been gone for more than 20 years from CRS. But anyway, so I told him, I'm sorry, I can't tell you, you know, anything at all about this, about the mediation. I said, there was a mediation and you know how it ended. Okay. So they wrote a book. He wrote a book. He put my name on it. It wasn't, what do you call it, complimentary to me. I had my nose bred, you know, by that, you know. But anyway,
that's great.
Yeah, that was the case. But you know, other times there were mediations of a kind between when I had parties, community parties together, and so forth. But as I said to you, they were wild and woolly. And, you know, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. I don't know what my percentage was, you know, but I wasn't batting 500, I can tell you that.
Okay. So so just a couple other markers for me.
Yeah.
So what did you do in between your stints at CRS?
Two things. One, when that case with the SIDM ended after a while, maybe about 6 months, a year later, I got a call from the mayor's office, from this guy Haskell Zaire, who was with the American Jewish Committee, and he said to me, I think I have a job for you. I said, yeah, what? I thought he was going to get me in another thing, you know. He said, well, there's a vacancy at the New York City Human Rights Commission. They need an executive director. And at that point, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's now the representative for Washington, D.C., she's the, you know, she was the chairwoman of the committee. And she brought along, and she brought along this guy who was the executive director to go with her to Washington, you know? And so said, the mayor's hiring a new chair and they need an executive director. And, you know, I think you would be the right guy for this job and everything else. So I said, okay, I'll go talk to them. So I went to the office and I met a guy there named Stanley Friedman, who was a top aide or the principal aide or deputy mayor. I forget his exact title, but he was way up there in the Beam administration. And he said to me, he interviews me. He said, I want to interview you for this job, blah, blah, blah. But he's interviewing me. He's laying down on a couch like this, you know, and he's asking me questions. I know, you know. So anyway, at the end of it, he says, you're hired. I said, well, you know, I have a job, you know. I went back to CRS and I called up the director at that time. His name was Mexican-American guy, Gil Pompa. Called Gil Pompa. And I said, Gil, I got this offer. I said, but I don't really want to go. I said, can you give me a leave of absence? He said, absolutely not. He said, you go. That's the end, you know. I don't know if he was mad or what. Or, you know, maybe he wanted to get rid of me all along. I really don't know, you know. So, okay. So I took the job, but as it happens, I get the job and everything else. It was a whole other story I won't go into. But a year or so later, Mayor Beam loses the election to Ed Koch. So January it was, it comes into office. A few days later, I get a call from Koch's office. Some guy said to me, Mr. Hernandez, Mayor Koch wishes to thank you for your service to the city of New York. He said, but leave your office by noon today or something. You know, I had a deadline, you know. I said, oh, Christ, what do I do now? It wasn't funny at the time. But anyway, so I get a job. I go upstairs, I get a job, you know, they have a bulletin board, you know, at the Civil Service Commission there. And I see that they have a job. They're looking for loaned executives. So what the hell's a loaned executive? Anyway, I fill out the paperwork and blah, blah, blah. So I get chosen to be in for the job. And so they start lending me out to different federal agencies and nonprofits. You know, when they have projects and things. So one of them I get loaned out to a group called National Urban Fellows Program. And so I was there for like 6 months or so. I get loaned out to the Puerto Rican Forum, it's a nonprofit, another nonprofit agency. I get loaned out, and then finally I get loaned out to, believe it or not, the IRS. My God, you know, that was a trip. But anyway, I kept trying to get jobs. I didn't want to work for the IRS. I mean, you know, I had a nice job. It was like assistant resources services manager or something like that, you know, with personnel, training, all that stuff. And facilities too. You ran the facilities thing. And so I learned a lot. I really did learn a lot about federal operations and what a real federal agency looks like. You know? And so I worked there. And then an opening about 1986 or so, 85 maybe, you know, it's hazy, I know. But somewhere in the middle 80s, there's a job opening in CRS, and I applied for it, and I went through a whole lot of changes, but ultimately I got it. I got my old job back, you know, and I said, hallelujah, you know, I got saved once again by CRS. So I went back.
Were you conciliation specialist during the duration?
Yes, exactly. You know, they gave us various titles: community relations specialist, conciliation specialist, mediation specialist. You know, we could call ourselves whatever we wanted. You know what I mean? It wasn't, CRS is not a real federal agency. You know, very loosey-goosey. Okay, very loosey goosey. I know, but and every time, they kept reducing the number of people and stuff like that, and we get different directors, and things would start all over again. So that's when I went back, and as I said, and I had some very interesting assignments in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, when the Cubans and the Haitians were interred there, and then they sent me to Panama because they had a big riot, but the Cubans rioted it in Guantanamo. So I was sent there, and it was a big deal,
I want to go back before we get into this case because I want to hear about Guantanamo.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Williamsburg real quick.
Williamsburg,
just ask you a few follow-up questions.
Yeah.
But I should have asked earlier.
Yeah, it's okay. I went on and on. I didn't let you ask questions.
Oh, no. It's a great story. Why interrupt? So with Williamsburg, how did you first get involved? Did CRS just send you out there and say,
because it's been something in the paper. We had in the office at that time, there was no computers and all that stuff. But what we had was a teletype machine, with the thing with the bubble, with the glass top.
No,
you're too young.
Sorry.
Anyway, they and a little ribbon came out. So we used to go in that room, every once in a while and read the tape and, to see what was going on.
I've seen this in movies now.
Yeah, you've seen it in movies, So they, and we monitored it, several times a day to see what was going on, because they would report from all over the region. And anyway, so I think that's how I got the news on the teletype machine that there had been some trouble in Williamsburg. So I said, I think I better go out there or, whatever. I went out there and to assess the situation, Yeah,
and tell me a little bit more about that assessment. What did you do when you first got out there? It sounds like you tried to gain entry. But you had to leverage your connections.
Right. That's right.
So what did you first do to try to gain entry?
Well, I went knocking on people's doors and, going in nearby to where the action happened as to what happened. And, and I said, well, who are the community leaders here? And nobody wanted to tell me anything, really. I mean, the people are suspicious. You're a Fed, They're not just going to open up to you. I had moved out of Williamsburg a long time ago. I wasn't, so they didn't know me. Although I did, as I said, I knew people there, but I had sort of lost contact with a lot of them, by the way, too. But anyway, that's how I got into it, and try to find out what happened. Try to get the real situation, not what was reported on the ticker tape. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I had to do. And then you come back to the office, you do some paperwork, you fill out a form, and the level of, we had levels of violence, from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever it was. But that was it. And then you shipped it off to Washington, and Marty Walsh got a hold of it. He was the director of the what was it called, Crisis Response Unit. So they had a whole, and he had it was very funny. He had a big map of the U.S., an electronic map, and every time something broke out anywhere, he put a little pin in it, and it lit up, blinking, and it had different colors. Like if it was in the assessment, it was like yellow, and if it was a full-scale riot, it was red. So it was like the war room in 10 Downing Street. People moving around planes in that, like that. So anyway, that was it.
I appreciate that. Did you do anything to prepare before you left for Williamsburg for a case like Williamsburg?
Like, no, I didn't put on any riot gear or anything like that. No, not really. You had to you had to make some phone calls. I don't know if I did that. Then you had to figure out how you were going to get out to the community, wherever it was. And I had a government car assigned to me. I called it the Gray Goose. It was all gray and it had government plates on it. So, you figure out how you're going to get to, sometimes you have to take a plane, you have to make a thing, You had you kept in your office a go bag. You had your toothbrush, you had a change of underwear, in case, whatever. It was a flashlight, stuff like that. So that was it, and then you got on the first thing going to Cleveland, wherever it was, They sent us all over the country, by the way, but, I went all over, but.
So one more question before we
Yeah.
talk about them sending you to Guantanamo.
Yeah.
So you got out, you did a little assessment by knocking on doors, trying to figure out what was actually happening.
Yes.
And how did you decide on your initial response plan based on that assessment? Maybe it's that you decided, well, nobody will talk to me. I need to get somebody else in here. And that's why you called the subject matter expert or found your old friends. But how did you make that decision?
Well, you went back to the office and I spoke to, at that time, Wally was basically, there was another guy named Ed O'Connell, who was a regional director, I think, at the time. And, I spoke to Wally and and I said, look, this is happening. And so I guess he made some calls to Washington. Basically he was the decision maker, ultimate decision maker. And, obviously he had a lot of experience. And so he said, well, go back there and see what you can do and all that stuff. So that was basically, it was a sort of a touchy-feely kind of decision. You know what I mean? You knew instinctively what wasn't anything scientific that,
There's not a rubric for it.
No, there isn't. And, maybe you like that community, maybe for some personal reasons, you knew somebody there or whatever it was, or you just felt in your bones you had to do something. Maybe you were bored waiting around for something to happen. Okay, this is my chance. All we needed was one of those fireman poles, come down, jump in there, get on the fire engine and go. That's all.
Fair enough. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to hit the pause button for 1 second.
Okay, sure. Let me get some. Mm-hmm.
So you were going to take me to Guantanamo Bay. And if you could, before going there, tell me, how you were sent there, what you did to prepare. It sounds like Guantanamo might have a little more preparation than Williamsburg.
Yes. When Grace Flores Hughes took over the agency, she got saddled, or she accepted a program to work with the settlement of unaccompanied minors. This thing of unaccompanied minors coming into the country is not a new thing, And this group was originally, I think, in the Department of Education. I'm not sure. But anyway, they got put into, for some reason, I really don't know what the rationale was, okay? But for some reason, they brought in these people from that program and to work with CRS. And, there was some tension between the two groups, like, who the heck are these people coming in, whatever, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, when the whole crisis of the Cubans and Haitians, not the first time when the people from Mariel, Cuba, under the Carter administration, I think it was, right? Mariel Cubans, I forget what president it was then, came into Miami in droves. One of the others after, I forget what year it was now, but anyway, they started getting on rafts and all kinds of decrepit boats, to come to the U.S. So the government sent out the Coast Guard and the Navy to pick up these people, okay, and on the ocean. In fact, I was in on one of those rescues. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But anyway, so they, I don't know if it was who called in CRS and they said, okay, and State Department was involved here. And because they didn't know where they were going to resettle these Cubans. They did not want to resettle them in the US. They didn't want that same problem they had with the Mariel Cubans. So they were going to keep they decided to put all these people in Guantanamo and Panama, okay, 2 places. So they set up these huge, some people call them concentration camps, okay, because they had barbed wire all around. They had Army troops guarding it, okay? They had watchtowers, they had, people in tents, the whole thing. So, so they called CRS, somebody called CRS, and they to be part of this group of federal people. I think maybe there were people there from FEMA too, I don't know. But anyway, they had lots of people. And we were called in and one of our CRS remembered people was there too, Ernie Stallworth. He can tell you more. But anyway, we were reported to Florida. We went to a naval airport in north of Miami. I forget what it's called now. And they assigned me to cots, and we slept there waiting for a plane to take us to Guantanamo. So anyway, 2 days later, but we were told to, and that we would be received in Guantanamo by people from the State Department and Department of Defense, and they would give us whatever we needed, housing, vehicles, whatever we needed to do our job, we would get from them, and they would tell us where to go, when to go, and so forth and so on, and to try to talk to I want to call them inmates. That's not the correct term, but the people who were there in the camps,
refugees, perhaps.
Yes, and couldn't leave. So, flew to Guantanamo on this huge C-530 Coast Guard plane, which is loaded with trucks, tanks, and all sorts of equipment and other stuff. And I was confined to a little area inside this plane. That time I was on that particular flight, I was the only person, only civilian, because they couldn't get everybody on, whatever it was. And so as we're flying toward Guantanamo, they spot some boats in the water in the Gulf of Mexico there, Caribbean, and whatever it was. And this was like this huge plane. So the guy said, I said, well, gosh, I don't know. I told him, I said, look, because they went down low, really low to the water, maybe 100 feet, maybe less even, and they said, well, Mr. Hernandez, our first mission is to rescue these people. The second mission is to take you to Guantanamo. And they had priority, So anyway, though, they landed on the water, was that, like pontoons they had, So they land on the water. And no, I made a mistake. They did not land on the water. They kept on going, but they radioed in the location of these people. Okay, yeah. I thought they were going to land in the water, but they didn't. But anyway, they radioed in the position, and so eventually they brought them to Cuba. So when I got there, they took me to the camp, and they put me on a big cruise ship that the government had hired. It was an old decrepit cruise ship called the something sky. Anyway, it was so cruddy. I mean, we call it the pigsty, you know. So I get there and there's a guy in charge of assigning where you go to sleep, you know. So he puts me down, way down in the bottom of this damn ship. I'm claustrophobic, I mean, no. And they put me with a guy who was huge. I don't know where he was from, you know, from another agency. I don't know where he was from, but I said, I'm not going to sleep with this guy. You know, this is impossible, you know. So I get up there, go back to the guy. I said, listen, I lied to the guy, okay? I said, I'm a GS-15, which is equivalent to a naval captain, okay, or a colonel in the Army. You know, and I took out my credential. I showed it to him quick. I mean, it doesn't, yeah, it says conciliation specialist on it, but yeah. So he said, okay, Mr. Hernandez, we'll see what we can do for you. So they put me on the top deck in this huge cabin, you know. Anyway, so every day, all of the CRS people that were there from this program and some of the conciliation specialists came down later. Every morning we would meet there and kind of discuss what we were going to do, and we would be assigned to different parts of the camp. You know, we would ride out there, and so I was like the liaison between the camp leadership, okay, which was the indigenous people from Cuba and Haiti. You know, they had different camps. They had one camp for the Cubans, one camp for the Haitians. They were segregated that way. And my job was to go to these camps and as a liaison and find out what concerns they had, what problems they had, and so forth. And then I would relay this to the military people, okay? And say, look, we're having a problem here, a problem there, and so forth. Like one problem was that where they set up the dining room, the dining area, they had a huge dining area where they fed the refugees. And, but right outside the dining room is where they set up all the latrines, you know, the porta potties. Oh God, the smell was horrible. So I said, look, you can't have this here. I mean, people are eating here, you know? I said, oh, we didn't realize. We do that in the Army. I said, well, they're not in the Army, you know. That was the thing, you know. Anyway, so we kind of work out problems like that, make the thing go be easier and so forth. And then a riot broke out in Panama. So they wanted all the Spanish-speaking guys from CRS, there were several of us, to go to Cuba, to go to Guantanamo, to Panama. So we get there.
And let me pause you for a second.
Yeah.
You went from the Cuban refugee camps, for lack of a better term, to the similar version that was in Panama.
Correct.
So these were camps that have been set up.
Yes.
And so they're similarly set up. They probably had the latrine and food problem. That could have been.
They had different problems. You know,
right.
but the Cubans, you know, the Haitians were peaceful. You know what I mean? They didn't. I mean, they had problems. We worked on them. We solved them. You know, so it was kind of mediation, if you want to call it that. But you know, we never had them together. You know what I'm saying? The military and them together. We just reported back to the military. Said, look. But anyway, we get there, and the Cubans had rioted, and a lot of the military people got hurt. You know, because they were throwing rocks. You know, huge rocks and everything. So I wasn't too happy about going there. You know, but that's what the hell. I got nothing else to do, and I go there. And, you know, I would go every morning. I would drive from Panama City to Camp Celia Cruz. They gave the name of the camp. The Cubans called it Celia Cruz. So the military adopted it, you know. She's a salsa singer, you know, and everything. So I would go there every morning and meet with the camp leadership. And the Cubans were very formal. You know, they would call me Don Miguel, okay? Don doesn't mean Mr. Don is like sir, you know, like United, you know what I mean? It's an honorary title in Hispanic countries for people who are professionals of one kind or another, landowners, you know, blah, blah, blah. Government officials, you know, military officers, they're all Don. They call me Don Miguel, like you're like the mafia Don, you know what I mean? But you, it's different. So they would call.
You're GS-15, so
yes,
probably.
yes, allegedly. So they would say, Don Miguel, un problema, and un problema would turn into a whole morning discussion. But in between all of that, they would be making Cuban coffee. And if you've been to Miami and you've had Cuban coffee, you know it's this much coffee, liquid with this much grounds in it. You know what I mean? It's like, oh man, it's got caffeine. So you know what I mean? But anyway, they would make coffee for me. They had, you know, whatever food they got from the military, rolled donuts, mostly donuts, you know. And we would sit around the table and just BS, you know what I mean? Just normal conversation. And if there was a problem and everything, I went back to the guy who was in charge of my camp, who was he was an Air Force officer, who he was Hispanic himself, but he was in charge of the that elite Air Force group, you know, that goes in and there's secret missions and, you know, rescued people and stuff like that, you know, that are being held by the terrorists and stuff like that. But anyway, they were a tough bunch of people, you know what I mean? So I go to talk to him, and, you know, and he was pretty good guy. I mean, he was excellent, actually. So we say this had happened. So one day and then the other part of the job was, and this is where the State Department got involved, they would ask me to go to various consuls and embassies in Panama City to see if any of them would accept any of the Cubans to go to third countries, you know. So that was pretty nice duty in a way, because, you know, they had parties, you know, I mean, they had a social occasion, you know, and they would invite me and everything, and, you know, they want to know all about CRS and all that stuff. And so we would you know, we weren't successful every time, but we did get some people, a fairly large group to go into. Sweden was one country that took people, not because of everything I did, but you know, it's still really done by the State Department. I was just a guy on the scene there, you know what I mean? So anyway, it came time, and then we were told specifically, do not say or do anything that encourages people that they are going to be resettled in the US. Whatever you do, we could say whatever you want, but do not give them the impression on any level that they're going to the US. All right, I didn't, you know. And he said, and the other thing I wasn't supposed to do was accept any mail from them, because they wanted me to take letters and stuff and send it to their relatives in when I got back to US, give it to their relatives in Miami or wherever they were, you know. So, okay, I won't do that. But at some point, I think it was like end of summer of '92, somewhere in there, they decided that the Cubans decided of their own volition that they were going to open up a school for the kids, you know, because these kids had not been in school. So they organized on their own, with no help from the US whatsoever, including me, did not opened up a school, you know. And not only did they open up a school, but they took whatever materials and things they could find, and they made shoes for these kids, okay? So that they would go to school not barefoot. And they had dresses and pants, the girls had dresses and pants that were sewn, okay, with materials that they got there. Pressed starch. I mean, the first day of school, these kids march up to school, you wouldn't, I mean, what a scene that was. I mean, unbelievable. I said, whoa, these Cubans have their act together, So, so anyway, that worked out. Ultimately, the government accepted that, and then we had some classes, how to open up a bank account, stuff like that. Just day-to-day lessons. So when they got to Miami or wherever it was, the government changed their mind, said we're going to take people to Miami or back to the U.S. So that's how they got reset. A lot of people, Cubans, got resettled.
And so, how long were you involved with this? It sounds like months.
Yes, it was months. It was like 3-4 months there in between Guantanamo and Panama, and I think it was like 96, and we had an operation. I got the card somewhere. I'll show it to you. We got identification cards, from the military. They fingerprinted us, and we had all kind of stuff to wear, But after the riot, nothing. Everything basically calmed down there, and nothing happened. But so the problem was getting people resettled, basically, and settling these little teeny tiny disputes.
And so, were you in that time period? When you were in Panama specifically?
Yeah.
So the Cubans were rioting, and the Haitians.
Yeah, I wasn't there during the riot. I came in after the riot.
After the riot.
After the riot, yes.
Were you doing something similar with the Haitians as well, or were
no, because there was no conflict with the Haitians. I think I mentioned that, right? No, mm-hmm. they didn't have any physical disorders in Guantanamo. The Haitians were peaceful. They were not. They were more stoic.
I see.
About
but
the
they
situation.
Did they have a list of concerns that arose daily? Did you?
Yeah, they had problems that arose daily, but they never. As I said, there were things that Ernie Stallworth and I spotted, that were problems, like the latrine issue, hours of recreation, when they could have ball games or stuff, whatever, stuff like that. It was like, it was no problem. We just went there every day, stayed in the camp till, I don't know, 3-4 in the afternoon or something like that, or sometimes into the evening, depending. But that was it. No, there was no problem, at all, either with the Cubans or the Haitians. And Guantanamo was very interesting also because the Navy employed a lot of Cubans, who were living outside the camp in Santiago de Cuba, Santiago, which was like a few miles from the perimeter of the camp. I don't know if you saw that. You saw that movie with where these guys are in Guantanamo, and one of the soldiers winds up dead. One of the Marines winds up dead. Anyway, that's what it was. It was So, but anyway, yeah, and so they would employ a lot of Cubans, and there were a lot of who were servicing the camp. They would run the kitchens,
mm-hmm.
All the other. Guantanamo was like a mini U.S. city. It had a bowling alley. It had movie theaters. It had a golf course, swimming pools. All kinds of facilities to keep the troops happy. And so they hired these people, and we interacted with them too. On the, we ran into them from time to time, just chit chatted with them, and so we went to parties that the Jamaicans organized. A lot of the troops had been in, I think Afghanistan at that time, or somewhere in the Middle East, and they would make Middle Eastern food, stuff like that, So yeah, so Haitians, Cubans, people from Jamaica, wherever else. So it was that kind of a thing. It was more, but we did have one problem there in Guantanamo. I don't know, something happened in one of the camps, and gosh, I can't remember the details. but I wasn't involved. That's why I don't remember it. But I was pretty pissed off that I wasn't called, to go, because I had the most damn experience than anybody that you guys sent here, But anyway,
that's good.
But they sent people, to deal with that problem at one of the Cuban camps, and or Haitian camp. I don't remember. It was over. It was over pretty quickly.
Great. Well, this has been great background about these two cases in Williamsburg and in Panama/Cuba. Really fascinating, incredible work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn now to more specific. Sorry, if you want.
No, I just want to mention one thing that.
Yep.
I also went. They sent me to Ireland to work with the police and the people who they call them the travelers. They consider themselves gypsies. Like the gypsies is the bad term. I learned. Okay, the travelers, and the travelers are under a lot of pressure by the Irish non-travelers, because they travel in these caravans, which are basically trailers and campers and all that stuff, and they don't like the travelers camping in their front yard and stuff like that. So that was a whole big Megillah, and I think at that time, or shortly after that time, was when all the trouble was in Ireland, and they sent George Mitchell there to help them settle this whole thing. And somebody said, well, the travelers aren't being consulted, and all this stuff, and they have a stake in this too. So I got called in by this group and went over there and to give some mediation training lessons to this private nonprofit group in Dublin. And then I also went to, they also sent me to Romania, because.
What was the nonprofit group, if you don't mind me asking?
I'll have to look it up. Okay, I can't come up with it, but it's a big group, and they're right there in Dublin. I'm trying to think of it, but if I come up with the name, I'll tell you.
Okay. And you were saying you also were assigned to go to Romania? Romania,
yeah. I suddenly became the CRS's expert on Roma people. Yeah. Yeah. And anyway, Romania, the Roma people have a reputation that they're not good people. Okay. It's just how people feel. Some are not, and some are. Okay, it's like any other group. Anyway, so again, I was assigned to work with a non-profit group there who were of non-Roma and Roma people, and talk about mediation thing. And I worked with the Romanian National Police. In fact, they gave me a medal, which I have somewhere around here. It's a big gold thing, I wear it on New Year's Eve. No, my talk. No,
why not?
But yeah, why not? But anyway, it was a good, no trouble happened while I was there, because I was there. Everybody calmed down. But no, so we were there about a week or so, maybe, so giving the training to the people. And every time I went to the police headquarters, national police headquarters, they would have a guy out there who would salute me. I salute him back. Yeah, so that was pretty damn interesting. And one of my big problems, I thought one of my problems was going to be there, by the way, this is what I really want to say, was that I try to be as humorous as I possibly can be, and I thought that since they had translators, okay, I didn't know a word of Romanian, okay. I only learned one thing, Bona Dominiața, which means good morning or something like that. And Romanian is the purest Latin language there is, I understand.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they speak it with a kind of Italian lilt to it, you know. Anyway, so I met a lot of interesting people there. And the head of the police department, of course, was one. Another one was the king of the gypsies, or the emperor of the gypsies, they call this guy. You know, so then I told somebody, oh, I met the emperor of the gypsies. I said, they have dozens of emperors. You know, and they put me in a house. They set me up in this house that was one of the homes of the Romanian dictator, Ceausescu, his name was, I think. You know, he had been deposed. This was after the revolution there. And he had been deposed. So they put me in this huge mansion, you know. I was the only one there, only person there. And I had 2 servants assigned to me, a cook and a driver, okay? And, you know, they would cook meals for me and all that stuff. And the table was like 12 feet long, and I was the only one there. And, you know, I couldn't really talk to them, whatever, but, you know, it was interesting to be there. And then they took me to this other town that I had to go to, which was in the Carpathian Mountains. I can't think of the name of the town now. But anyway, it was the town closest to where Dracula's castle was. And so when I get there, they put me up in a nice hotel room. I was with the people from the nonprofit group, and give me a nice room and everything. And so I find out that there's a Chinese restaurant in town. So I decide I'm going to go there and have some dinner, you know. So I go there and I said to the waiter, you know, I said, listen, I want dumplings, you know. So he said, we don't make that, you know. He spoke English. He said, we don't make that, you know. You don't make dumplings. What kind of Chinese restaurant is it? He said, I tell you what, I'll show you how to make dumplings. I knew how to make dumplings. So I went in the kitchen, I showed them how to make dumplings. Oh, they were so happy. What else happened there? Oh,
did you see the castle?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I went, obviously, it's a tourist spot.
So what, and that's probably why he spoke English, because
yes.
it's a tourist spot. I wonder, is there anything you took back from these stints in Romania and Ireland?
Souvenirs. Even no, took back. You mean lessons learned?
Yeah, lessons learned that you incorporated into your practice at CRS as a conciliator.
I really couldn't apply because, you know, it was so different. You're working, you know, you're not working in the US, you're not working in your own culture. I mean, some things are the same, you know, as you would do stateside, but I think the thing you had to get across was that you were there, that the settlement of any problem was their own, that they owned it, and try and get that over to people. But there weren't any other CRS people that I recall that were sent over to foreign countries. You know, I mean, I consider myself fortunate, and you know, I had pictures and things like that, obviously, but I don't think there was something that you could apply to, except the fact that you had to understand that you were in a foreign culture. You were not in your, you know, in your comfort zone on any level. I mean, that also happened here in the US, you know, but it's certainly not as intense as it is when you go to a foreign country. And then you have, like, you know, State Department looking over your shoulder, you know, whereas most of the things in the US, when we went out there, we were basically out there on our own, you know. We had, you know, I guess the other thing, just generally speaking about the whole thing, is that you had 2 CRSs in one. You had the regional offices and you had the Washington field office. and it was hard to mesh those things together sometimes, because we would say, "Oh, those guys in Washington, they don't know nothing," and the people in Washington say, "Those guys in the field, they're just a bunch of cowboys. They don't have the big picture. We know everything. So try to resolve the conflict between headquarters and CRS was a challenge always, whether we were.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that conflict? Give me a concrete illustration, perhaps.
Let's see. Well, we would, Washington would call us, from time to time, and and we sort of knew what they were going to call or complain about, or say you should do this and you should do that, and in one way or another, the field people, not in every instance, okay, but there was a certain amount of resistance to taking any kind of direction from headquarters. It was what we call malicious compliance. Yeah, okay, you say okay, but it was rare that we, unless it made sense, now I can't think of a particular instance, but we would sort of kind of mull it over, and it wasn't like in every instance, but I think it was a kind of a natural thing. Like you ever have this in business, I think, between the corporate headquarters and the people, who really do the work out there, in the various cities, that kind of thing.
That's a good analogy. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about your process for conciliating or mediating or whatever you don't want to call it.
Yeah.
You are not the first person I've interviewed who doesn't want to call it any of those things.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, want to focus in two ways. One on a table-oriented process, which you've been through a little bit in the context with the judge from the Southern District.
Yeah.
But when you're mediating in a table-oriented process, a dispute, a traditional CRS dispute around race or ethnicity, I want to ask you to talk me through the steps in that process. And there's a number of questions that I have, but I'll start with this one. So for table-oriented processes, who was at that table? How were the participants at the table selected? And what were the challenges to getting particular individuals to the table?
If it was a community, let's say a community police dispute, as an example, we had a lot of them where a Black teenager was killed by a police officer. I did a couple of those. And so naturally, you had at one side of the table, the chief of police or the commissioner, whatever the highest title was, or the police chief, and he would have some of his people on one side, or sometimes it included the mayor, but generally not. And the other side were, let's say, the guy who was the head of the NAACP in that town, or if it was a black-white thing, it would be the minister, local clergy, Black clergy would be there. And then there would be, if there was some kind of other agency like involved, when there was some person of color on that agency that was recognized as a leader in the community of a nonprofit or whatever it was, generally they would be there. And inevitably you would have some guy who was identified as a leader of a quote unquote militant organization, not a regular nonprofit group, but a neighborhood person, okay? So you would, so you had uh, and that kind of leadership changed sometimes during the process. You know what I mean? You didn't have the same person, you know, at the table every time. So it was wild and woolly in that sense that you know, you couldn't say I talked to the leader. You know what I mean? You know, I talked to the mayor. You could say you could talk to the mayor or the chief of police. You know, was there and was present, but you couldn't quite come to that level because even the community committees, they would have problems as to who, in fact, was the spokesperson. Okay, that was that was hard because as much as we tried to say, you know, off camera, so to speak, off uh, extra outside the meetings, and before you start to prepare people for the mediation, you would say, you know, you need to select a spokesperson. It would be good if you did that. You don't have to do it, but it would be a good idea because, you know, and you know, we'd lay out what the rules were, and it, it, it didn't work a lot. Most I would say a lot of the times, you know, you couldn't because there were people that had different agendas. You know, I mean, it was natural. It wasn't like out of what do you call it? Just to be ornery. You know what I mean? It was a natural thing. You had a guy who was in NAACP, a guy who might have been from the uh, uh, another African American organization or Hispanic, as the case may
Urban
be.
League, LULAC,
Urban
something
League,
like that.
yeah, whatever.
So
people.
One challenge about bringing this group together is that the leadership is shifting.
Yes. Yes.
And that could be with the LULAC or the community leader, or
that's right.
Even the mayor could get elected or the chief fired,
that's right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So they're shifting on all sides.
Yeah.
Were there other challenges to getting representatives from these groups to the table?
It was not a problem getting them to them, it was getting them out, you know, excluding people, you know.
Right?
So that's
they wanted to be in.
Yeah.
So when you convened a table-oriented process, what were some of your goals? And we can stick with the police-involved shooting as just something to make this part of the conversation more concrete. What were your goals for involvement?
Okay. If, for example, there had been a street disorder, a riot with stores being looted and that kind of stuff, okay? One of the groups that we tried to get involved was, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, as an example, because their people were being hurt. And we would try to tell the mayor, okay, look, we gotta settle this because every day these stores are closed and everything else, and if there was a boycott, it's gonna be difficult for you to recover this, you know? So we try to play to people's self-interest, whenever we found what those were. So the businessmen obviously want to be there, and they act as pressure groups, if you will, external to the mediation, to the mayor or whoever's the superintendent of schools or whatever it happened to be, to get them to come to an agreement. Okay, so that's kind of the dynamic that was going on, both inside the mediation and outside of the mediation. Whatever the situation was, we needed to bring resources, whatever, or people who had influence, okay, on some level. So we try to do that, outside of the community, but people who had regional or wider influence in the community, who weren't necessarily from there per se, but from that neighborhood, but who were respected and had a reputation. And sometimes I tried to get mediators who were, real mediators from the outside, okay? People who were teaching mediation or, later on, and this became a field, and who had, because a lot of the issues were complex and things that I had absolutely no expertise in, you know what I mean? But some of the people did. So I tried to get them in, or if I couldn't get them in, I would call them up and I'd say, listen, I'm so-and-so from the CRS, if I, you know, and I'm involved in this situation, everything, and I'm hoping I could, what do you call it? Scratch your brain. What's his brain?
Consult, pick your brain.
Pick your brain. That's it. Pick your brain. So
when you're saying mediators, are you thinking of, you know, if you're in Columbus, Ohio, a local mediator?
No, like I would call these guys like from Harvard, Yale, stuff like that. Those kind of guys. And I would say, you know, I'm gonna pick your brain, and you know, I mean, if I call them in, you know, I have to figure out some way they're gonna get paid. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, but they'll talk to you on the phone.
Yeah, they'll talk to you on the phone.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So that's good. That's the kind of dynamics that I tried to bring to it if I could, because I know what I don't know, you know, I know what I don't know, and you know, some people don't trust anybody from the Justice Department too, you know.
Right. So how did you? So you had some of your goals in mind.
Yes.
And the participants all had different goals,
yes.
I assume.
Yeah.
How did you weave those goals together in the mediation session?
As I said, I tried to find out what they wanted and try to put it in different language. Like if they would say that generally community, if something happened with the police, you know, the first thing you hear in any community, almost any community, I guarantee you, is they're going to say, we want the police chief fired, you know. So you have to say things like, yeah, you know, I understand what you're saying to me, but, you know, he has a civil service job. He has civil service protections. He's got to go, the village or the town, whatever, has got to go through this whole process. And it's going to take like forever to get there. I mean, I know you want this guy gone now. Okay, I understand that. But you gotta, you know, you got to think about how we're going to get something. Maybe we could start the process for getting him fired, you know. But it's not going to happen right away. You know that, don't you? Or you realize that. And most people did, you know. Oh yeah, I never thought about it that way. So. Or the guy would say, I want $10 million. I'm like, oh, so you want a lot of money, huh? You know, so you come up with stuff like that. I mean, you had a trick bag, you know what I mean? You had stuff in that worked in other places, and so you try it out. But the most part was gaining people's confidence, you know, because particularly community people, look, whatever community go that had been some trouble, well, this wasn't the first time that happened there. It goes back, way back, you know, and then people would talk to me about stuff that happened 20 and 30 years ago that hadn't been resolved, you know, murders and lynchings and you name it. So you had to, you know, I heard it all before, but I had to sit there and listen to it all over again. And people go off point and they come back. Oh my God. You know, I like to get to it, but no. And so you have to learn that, and that helps you weave different things together, you know.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge opportunity to build trust between the parties.
Yeah.
Listening to their baggage, listening to their background.
Yeah.
What are other opportunities and other ways that you built trust between yourself and the parties and among the parties themselves?
Oh, obviously the other thing is you get other people to help you build that trust, like I did in the Williamsburg case. That was not the first time, you know, because if somebody vouches for you, okay, then you're taking on that person's credibility with you in a way, you know. So that's one of the things that happen. And I always just start with tell people, oh yeah, they would call me to community meetings and stuff, and I'll say, I'm so happy to be back in my hometown. And they say, what? Oh, yeah, I said, my parents honeymooned here. Room 102, Holiday Inn or whatever it was, So that would get it, that would get it. So tricks of the trade,
Yeah. Okay. You like to use humor. That's for sure. Yeah. It works for you.
Yeah, it works.
Well, they wouldn't for me.
Yeah.
But good. You mentioned before you would go over rules with with the parties. I would call them ground rules. And
ground rules. Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like you had them. What were some of your ground rules, and did they work?
Yeah, but I had to constantly reinforce them. You know what I mean? I had to constantly come back to it. Didn't we agree to, like that, as opposed to say, you violated the rules, that wouldn't work. Okay. You say,
of course not.
Didn't we agree that we were going to limit ourselves to 5 minutes per person or whatever it was, that kind of stuff. But sometimes it worked. And as I say, community mediation is very wild and unruly. It is. It isn't very, it isn't that simple thing, sitting down at a table and everybody behaves diplomatically, reasonably. There's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of anger, because you have different people, a different situation. It's not, people aren't, community mediation is a whole other thing.
So we talk about in mediation training about setting an agenda of negotiable issues. Yeah. Did you set the agenda yourself, or did you develop? Did you identify an agenda by consensus?
Yeah, generally by consensus. Okay, look, we want to make this as speedy as possible. I know you want to get it over with, and we don't want to go on and on. We want this to be as productive as possible. So, maybe we should talk about this first and this second, that third, sort of put something out like that. And, an agenda is a plan, and, in the military, when I was in the military, I learned that your plan blows up the first time you get out there on the battlefield, and then this was the thing. Sometimes you could keep to the agenda, and sometimes they're gonna
change.
Yeah.
Who in these conversations did you typically facilitate the discussions, or did you allow someone else to facilitate conversations?
I typically facilitated it. Yeah, I can't think of another thing. I not in another role that I had as a village trustee of Ossining, where I live. We had a big community fracas here, and this was of a housing project that was going on. But anyway, I called Tim Johnson, and I said, Tim, we need you to facilitate this meeting, because the part of this community, most of this community, are not going to take it from me, because I'm an elected official here. You know what I mean? They ain't going to buy it. And I had a very hard time convincing our mayor, then mayor, that we should have an outside facilitator. I said, look, this way, you stay out of the limelight. You're not going to get all this heat and everything else, and ultimately, the board will get together and make decisions. But we're going to hear what the community has to say. Okay, and it's better if somebody else who's not involved is here to do it. And so that's what I use it then. But anyway, I didn't use it when I was the mediator. I didn't want anybody. I knew what I was doing.
Did you have any effective techniques for persuading a party to reframe a problem to make it negotiable?
Well, I would, as I said, mentioned to you earlier, I would say if they said they wanted the chief fired, I would tell them why that presented some difficulties, or if they, come up with we want to settle on money, or this or that, or we want, we want so and so to be hired, or or so and so to be fired. You had to come up with an alternatives to slow things down a bit, and let it digest for a while, and then you'd see what would happen. But as I say, it wasn't every time, oh, the mediation, I settled it, we signed a paper and, everybody went away happy and that was the end of it. No, it didn't happen that way in real life.
So how did you deal with disagreements over facts?
Like, did the cop shoot this guy or not?
Maybe it, or
yeah.
What happened before the shooting? Obviously,
what led up to the thing.
Yeah.
Well, no, I didn't get into the facts of the case. Because first of all, I didn't really know what the facts were. I mean, I knew generally what happened, okay? But I tried to convince people that I wasn't the fact finder, okay? Or the guy who would put those out to me. I just let them, okay. So, people say to me, well, this cop, he's been in trouble before. I said, is that a fact? That, okay. Or, I mean, I didn't dispute it, but I questioned it in a way that made people think about it a little bit. So that's kind of what you got to do in these things where you don't know really what the hell happened. We want, I would tell people say, well, that this and that. No, I really don't. I wasn't there. But you could, if there was a technical kind of thing more, you could call somebody who knows what the facts are, who has evidence, or somebody who had, quote unquote, a photograph. Even then, that was not really taken at face value, but if you had something that was considered to be proof, not he said, she said, that didn't fly.
No. So let me pause right here for 1 second.
Okay.
All right. So how would you deal as a conciliator with fundamental disagreements over values at a table-oriented mediation process?
What do you mean by values?
Yeah, so one way to think about values would be political beliefs. It could be a value system. Another way, as you mentioned in the Williamsburg example, there might be disagreements about what to do because some are connected to religious values,
right?
And others are other matters are not.
Yeah.
Folks don't have those that religious guidepost.
Yeah. Well, I learned a lot in terms of values of, for example, believe it or not, maybe it was too late, but from the situation involving the travelers and the Roma, okay, because those were really different cultures, and they have terms and customs and traditions that are very, very different from, my own. I mean, people are people wherever you go, and as they say, but you got to know where people are coming from, as we say on the street. Where are you coming from is the phrase, and so you have to get an understanding of that. And sometimes people said, well, you understand that we're doing this because X, Y, and Z. And, and I'm saying, you know what, really, I don't understand that. Tell me more about it, educate me, So that's the way you can get to deal with the cultural issues. Now, when you try to explain that to the other side, so to speak, because you have sometimes you in table negotiate, you have joint sessions, and then you have the separate ones. What do they call them? I forgot now. But anyway,
caucus sessions or
caucus and all that stuff. You have to explain to the other side where the other side is coming from. And it could be because of cultural differences, or it could be because of the history that one side had been with the other, a long thing. It's not necessarily cultural, but it has to do with historical situations. So all I can tell you about that is you try to do your best to help people understand what is happening and why it's happening. Like why? Well, why? Man say, well, why did so and so walk out of the meeting? That's the meeting. I mean, I thought we had an agreement we were going to meet. So you say, here's the way I read it. Joe left the meeting because he got very frustrated. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but it's plausible. It doesn't have to be that accurate. It doesn't have to be the absolute truth, unvarnished truth. But you have to come up with something that's plausible to explain. You can't explain other people's behavior, So do what you can.
How would you deal with power disparities at the bargaining table? You mentioned previously you had identifiable parties, union and management. Yeah. Theoretically, those parties have equivalent power.
Yeah.
If you had one party that was really had limited power, did you do something to empower them or train them before a mediation session?
Yes, we try to well, it sounds like a patronizing term, and maybe you try to educate people, through the process and why it's important that they understand how this thing works, and to explain the other side. Look, people say, look, it happens to me to say, the community people say, well, they don't understand our culture. I said, well, that the cops have a culture. Do you know that? They grow up in families of cops for generations. They've been cops, and they have a certain world outlook. Now, you and I may not agree with that. You and I don't agree. I've told you, you and I, kind of draw people in, identify. So you say, you and I don't understand that, but they have a different culture, and you got to be careful with the cops, because you don't know what happened before. They get the wrong messages sometimes from over the police radio or whatever that happened to be. That happened. So you try to explain that and say, but you were there, what happened, and So anyway, that's what you try to. It's an educational system. It's being able to express some alternative ways of looking at the situation, and let them, mull up. And guys say, well, it doesn't happen that way. I said, okay, don't argue with them, don't argue with them, because then you'll get into it. You'll need a mediator to settle that,
Oh. Well, we know obviously there's a lot of tension in many of these table-oriented sessions, and tension escalates. How did you diminish tension or help cut through the tension at the mediation table?
Let us say, I try to use some level of humor in the conversation, try to put it at, this level here, try to level it. speak as softly as I possibly can. And sometimes people said, you know what we hate about you, Miguel? You talk too softly. You talk. And okay, I said, I'll talk louder next time. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I'll talk about. But you got to bring people in, and that seems to include people in the conversation, make it as one as you possibly can in that situation. Try not to argue with people. There's always going to be tension. And you got to be able not to overreact. Victor and I went out to, this is a perfect example, to Elizabeth, New Jersey. There had been a riot there, disordered riot, whatever we call it. So the mayor called a big meeting at the high school, and there was like, I don't know, 100 people there, maybe more. And sitting in front of Victor and I, we sat in the back row. Sitting in front of us is a huge African-American guy who is identifiably African-American and African more. He had, back in those days, people wore dashikis, was a symbol, afros, as they call them, and, that whole regalia, if I want to call it that, okay? So he is in front of us. And during the meeting, this tells me, he gets up. And when he gets up, we noticed that under the dashiki, he had a big bulge. And you try not to be, what do you call it? Jump to conclusions, to put it mildly. But we both looked at each other and we said, oh my God, he's got a gun. How we came to that conclusion, I don't know. Okay. So when he jumps up, he goes back into back of the dashiki, back pocket, and he reaches for something and he brings it out. And oh my God, right there, we were getting ready to jump on this guy, because he had a gun. Now we're not cops, obviously, but here's some violence is about to occur, right? What the hell are we gonna do? Let him shoot people? So you know what he pulled out of his pocket? Robert's Rules of Order. What?
Wow. So good for him.
Yeah, but we looked damn foolish, because we I don't know, stereotyped them because of whatever he was wearing.
Yeah, maybe.
Whatever. And the situation and the adrenaline is flowing, So you got to be careful about that you don't, it's hard not to do that.
Did anyone ever threaten violence when they were involved in a table-oriented mediation? Or threaten to leave or leave?
Oh yeah, threaten to leave is always a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what you do in that thing, they don't really want to leave. Okay. They don't really want to leave. But what we would do is stand at the door and say, damn, Jim, I don't want you to leave now. If you leave, this thing is going to fall apart, or this thing is going to, sound something, And it's like when you're breaking up a fight, people don't want to fight. God, hold me back. You know what I mean? That's what they want. They want to be held back. 9 times out of 10. I'm not every time, but So
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how long did a table-oriented process last? A day, several months?
They lasted long days for me. I wasn't one of those quick guys, I couldn't do it, Maybe some people could do it in a day or so, but these things were very, very complicated. I felt they were complicated. Maybe they weren't. Maybe I made a big deal out of it, but it took me a long time.
So when they developed solutions, you've said that folks had to own the solution.
Yeah.
So were the solutions your idea? Were they their idea? How were they developed?
I found that if I posted an idea, that it wasn't accepted. Nobody, no, I don't have any credibility on that. Yeah, no, I went back. If I made a solution, I would try to put it, if I had an idea, I would put it as, it's occurred to me, but I don't know if it works. What do you think? What do you think? So, sometimes they bought it and sometimes they didn't, but I tried not to. Because I knew, nobody, and if they didn't, I knew if they didn't accept it then, it would take a while. Okay, this is why for it to gel, and then it would come out like they would bring it out, and I would say to myself, God damn it, that's my idea. I'm not getting any credit here.
That's always fun when that happens as a mediator.
Yeah.
So after solutions were agreed upon, what did you do anything to assure that they would actually be carried out? Did you or CRS have any role in post-negotiation processes to check in with the parties?
No, not really. No. I mean, we wrote, in some instances, we put down on paper, we tried to put it on paper. And then I would say something, this is a contract between each parties, and try to put it that way, and but they talked about us being a quote unquote self-enforcing mechanism. That was I don't know, if it was, and a lot of times these things would break down, and you have to go back. Even stuff that was on paper, you know what I'm saying? Well, you said that you signed this off here. Okay. Well, you said that was then. This is now. Yeah.
Very good. That was the last. You just answered the last question for me for this segment.